Hello, my name is Joseph Barber, and today I'm doing a review of The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask. Majora's Mask was a hotly anticipated sequel to The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, and it came out in April of 2000 in Japan and October or November for the rest of the world. It's a 3D action-adventure game. Its defining feature is a looping Groundhog Day structure, repeating the same 3-day cycle with most progress resetting. The other prominent feature is the titular masks, some allowing for transformations that radically alter movement or abilities. Majora's Mask is my favorite game of all time. The main reason for that is the atmosphere. The game is set in Termina, a parallel world to Hyrule, in which the majority of the Zelda franchise takes place. And things are similar, but just a little bit off. That sense of unease pervades everything, and is accentuated by the impending doom shown visually in the moon itself, but also in the nature of the world. The facade of normality fades quickly, and the dark and truly bizarre takes its place. Though the story is excellent, it is the gameplay that keeps it engaging. Just moving around is some of the most fun I've had on the console, and close to the most fun I've had in any game. While the visuals are definitely the early Poly 3D, there is still enough style to them that they are still enjoyable to look at. The sound design is second to none, something Nintendo has done consistently since Donkey Kong. The game is not without fault. The first cycle drags and some puzzles are particularly obtuse, but these are minor quibbles in an otherwise incredible experience. As I said, this is my favorite game of all time, and I would recommend people play it in whatever way they can. While the remake on the 3DS has significant issues compared to the original, it still has the soul of this amazing game, and I'd still say to play it. Majora's Mask began development as an expansion to Ocarina of Time. Originally, Miyamoto requested a remix to the Dungeons of Ocarina, creating a second quest, similar to the original Legend of Zelda. This would later come to light as Master Quest, part of a re-release on the GameCube. The dungeon designer, Eiji Onuma, was not content with this, however, and Miyamoto offered a challenge: build a new game in 1 year. There are conflicting accounts of exactly how it occurred, but the end result is that the limited time was part of the initial offer for the game. Miyamoto didn't want to direct the new game, so the job fell onto Onuma. He was overwhelmed by the new responsibility, as well as the limited resources, so attempted to find a hook that would set it apart from its predecessor and other games released at the same time. At some point, they felt that they could tell a grander story with a more compact game. As the game became more compact, they realized there would be different happenings in the same place, so the idea of reverting time came up. A French film called Run Lola Run came out in 1998 and was said to be a large influence on the project. In it, the same scenario repeats 3 times, with the protagonist trying out different things every time to attempt to get money to save her boyfriend. The initial idea was to have the cycle last for an entire week, but after playtesting it was an overwhelming amount of information from players, and so it was reduced to 3 days. There were significant differences in the development of Majora's Mask from Ocarina, even with many members of the same team. The biggest change was much less involvement from Miyamoto, who was supervising 5 different projects that year. He was known as someone who upended the tea table, often nearing the end of development. His input would require overhauls of core systems, or changing huge portions of games with little notice. With Ocarina, he was a daily presence, but it was hugely reduced for the new game. This led to worry among the team, who expected him to arrive one day and flip the script, but that never happened, and the game released on time to critical acclaim. The core gameplay of Majora's Mask is the same as it always has been for the Zelda series. There are 3 tentpoles: exploration, combat, and puzzle solving. You begin the game as a Deku, one of 4 eventual transformations. This is the introduction to the game, giving the player the opportunity to explore Clocktown, the main hub, and learn the basics. There is very little guidance at this point, and the player has to figure out how to get themselves out of their cursed form. After a short quest involving a game of hide and seek, using a telescope to see the moon, and finding some magic-giving fairies, the player is able to acquire the Ocarina of Time and reset to the beginning of the cycle. From here, the game opens up significantly. As a human, Link is able to leave the town and explore Termina Field. There are 4 dungeons and areas to discover and conquer: a swamp, a mountain, ocean, and wasteland. The first 3 each require a different transformation mask. The first is what you begin the game as, a simple Deku scrub. Next, you acquire the ability to become a strong and fearsome Goron, and finally a graceful aquatic Zora. Each has its own unique movement, and swimming as a Zora is still the best in the business for water control. Generally, you will enter a new area, talk to some of the NPCs to figure out what the next objective is, and from there explore the area. At the end of each section, there is a dungeon. The player is given a notebook to help keep track of characters, which assists in where they will be on a given day or time. This is helpful as there are dozens of side quests, big and small. In addition to the main path and quests, there are a fair few secrets tucked away, with each dungeon having 15 optional fairies to collect, giving substantial rewards. Of course, throughout all this, there is the ticking clock of the impending collapse of the moon. The 3 days of in-game time are only about 54 minutes, though there is a song given early on that doubles that. This means that all progress and quest lines or rooms cleared in dungeon resets at the end of each cycle, when the player is forced to play the Song of Time, taking the world back to where it was on the first day. Any masks, major items, or songs learned stay with the player, but everything else is gone. For some, this pressure is very stressful or frustrating, and that fear of losing progress is very real, but that is a very explicit part of the design. The feel of the game is fairly unique. Other Zelda titles invoke themes like wonder, excitement, and adventure. Majora opts for a more subdued feeling, with this great sense of sadness and loss pervading the world. The moon represents the inevitability of death, and we see some characters fall to despair, while others simply accept their fate. These themes come up in gameplay as well, through the time loop. No matter how many times you save a monkey from a grisly fate or rescue a hatch of eggs, they will be back to their dismal state soon enough. But despite all that, the moment-to-moment gameplay is simply fun. While the knowledge of death and destruction may be at the back of a player's mind, and the time ticking down is certainly nearer to the front, when it comes to playing the game, they don't matter. Adventuring through a dungeon, fighting skeletons, or racing around a track as a Goron all take priority, and that's what makes it great. While the themes are prominent, they don't dominate. Instead, they offer things to think about when the console is shut off, when the game is over. Majora's Mask was intended to have a very different feel than its predecessor. Iwata called the experience of playing Ocarina of Time an immense amount of hospitality. The game led you from place to place, a deliberately placed adventure with some scares and challenges, but all very much with the goal of keeping the player engaged and excited. Majora's Mask was instead shifted from hospitality to challenge. This was exemplified in 2 aspects. The first is your fairy companion, changed from Navi, who always offered hints to the extent of frustration, to tattle, while there was still some direction, and in many cases they offered less advice and more commentary. The second aspect is the theme of the game. Ocarina was all about change and growing up. Majora's Mask, on the other hand, is about grief and how we deal with loss. The main villain, Skull Kid, is an attempt at a much more sympathetic villain. He was mischievous, though not malicious, when he steals the eponymous mask from the Happy Mask salesman. After putting it on, however, he becomes a slave to its power and begins to terrorize the world. Link comes into this sometime soon after, and is said to be looking for Navi, his fairy companion from the previous game. It's never said what happened to her, but somehow his search ends up in Termina. The Skull Kid finds him and transforms him into a Deku, stealing his horse as well as his ocarina. After he meets the salesman who offers him a trade, he'll cure him of the curse if he returns Majora's Mask. There are many shades of gray here, as the salesman is definitely more than he appears, with extremely strange and erratic movement and intense anger, at one point strangling Link. Skull Kid is just lonely, and is in a situation far beyond his control. Link will travel around trying to fix the destruction he has caused, freezing the Goron people, poisoning the swamp, or causing the dead to rise. That's in addition to helping the many residents of Clocktown with their many problems. What I haven't yet mentioned is how strange the game is. There's a ghost who dances almost naked atop a spire after 2 a.m., a hand in a toilet that demands paper, or quite literal aliens who descend on a farm to steal their cows and brainwash the child who lives there. Then there is the final area of the game. After ascending to the moon, you are not greeted with a lunar surface or an underground dungeon, but rather a tranquil grove with children running around, each with a mask representing the bosses you defeated to get there. In the center is a lonely child wearing Majora's Mask, who asks if you want to play good guys and bad guys. The dissonance is so jarring here, and is one of my favorite areas of the game. There are a number of great-looking areas visually. The toxic swamp with man-eating plants, the frozen peaks in the mountains, and the ancient wasteland all still retain their atmosphere, and though the graphics are a product of their era, they are pushing it to its limit. The most disappointing area is definitely the ocean and the pirate's fortress, and while the swimming mechanics are fun, it feels lacking compared to the others. The dungeon is also one of the more confusing ones, and can result in swimming in circles, both literally and figuratively. The characters in all those areas, though many of the models are taken directly from Ocarina of Time, look solid and show their personalities as well. Tingle is an obvious highlight, a strange man floating on a balloon who claims to be a fairy. Notably, he is hugely popular in Japan, getting several spin-off games. Aonuma had this to say about him: "But as soon as we got that far in the process, we realized that anyone who would fly through the air making a map has got to be a really weird person. So at that point we decided, okay, we'll go with this and make him a really weird guy." The visuals of course play a large part in setting the mood, and through the use of subdued colors with occasional brighter splashes, much like the titular mask, the dark tone is established. The other key part of the presentation is the sound, and specifically the music. The overworld theme uses elements from the original soundtrack, with enough discordance to hint that something's wrong. One of the smartest ways the game uses music is that it changes based on which day it is. Most present in the Clock Down theme, which is this happy tune on the first day, but gradually descends to the much darker on the third. Just as with Ocarina, you collect songs throughout the game, with the most played being the deeply melodic Song of Healing. Even with Restoration, there is sadness, constant refrain in all the soundtrack, and of course the broader game. When Majora's Mask came out, it was the end of the N64's lifespan. The GameCube would come out a year later, and the PS2 had just arrived. And while it did well critically, holding an average of 95 on Metacritic, the sales were lackluster, a theme throughout Nintendo's releases at the time, ending up with about 3.36 million. There were around 30 million total units for the console at the time, resulting in a decent attach rate for late in the lifespan, but compared to its predecessor's 7.6 million, it was disappointing. While we can only speculate, this may be why the next Zelda game, Wind Waker, opted for a much lighter tone and brighter graphics, though in some ways that ended up biting them. The impact of Majora's Mask would not be felt for some time. The Western RPGs, like Fable and The Elder Scrolls IV, would incorporate daily schedules. That was years later. Time loops are still not a common element of games, but there are a number that take significant inspiration from Majora's Mask. Several came out just recently, like 12 Hours and The Forgotten City, with more on the horizon like Deathloop. Majora's Mask had a huge influence on me, and it was one of the first games I played that showed that they could have more to say than just save the princess, and the themes it deals with, loss, grief, remorse, are universal. It is a masterpiece in every sense of the word, and one that I think anyone with even a moderate interest in games should play. While the time system may be intimidating, that's part of the point and part of why I love it. I give it 5 stars. Wherever you are, have a good day.